So I watched The Mandalorian versus Grogu Dawn of Justice, and I thought that it was perfectly enjoyable. I mean, look, is this movie incredibly lightweight? Yes. Is there an intriguing plot? No. Does it further The Mandalorian and or Grogu as characters? Absolutely not. Does it help flesh out the world in between episodes 6 and 7 that sets up the First Order in an interesting way? Of course it doesn't. But at the end of the day, I simply can't deny that I had fun seeing Mando do cool Mando things and Grogu do cute Grogu things. Although I will give it some genuine compliments, I do really appreciate that Grogu is still like a practical puppet. Like, even though practical Grogu doing flips and stuff, like, it does look bad, like, quote unquote bad in certain points. But I would argue that seeing practical puppetry inherently makes us more forgiving of shortcomings. Whereas, like, I think, like, CGI Yoda bouncing around like a tennis ball looks like dog shit in the prequels. Seeing Grogu like do, flips and stuff and moving around in action, like, yeah, does it being more or less practical? I mean, I'm sure there's some CG involved, but it being more or less practical, I don't know, at least for me personally, it automatically makes me more forgiving of it, and it's almost endearing in a way. Or not almost, it is endearing to see like, an actual Grogu doing things. I will say this as well. It doesn't look like a TV movie. Like, I think a lot of us were worried that it was just going to feel like we were watching episodes of the TV show in a movie theater. And no, like the way that they filmed it, it was pretty cinematic. It looked pretty good, except for the huts. The huts looked real bad. They were an example of we're not going to use puppetry for some reason. It's just going to be CGI. And I'll tell you what, when you're seeing like a hut like actually moving around and doing action scenes, it just does not translate to live action. Where the movie really starts feeling like a TV movie is in the story. Like, this feels like the first couple episodes of the season 4 of The Mandalorian. If this was like the season premiere of season 4 of Mando and Grogu, and hey, it's the season premiere. We're just gonna do fun adventure with Mando and Grogu. Ideally, it would also set up what like the overarching arc of the season is. Like, this would be like an okay season premiere. We're going and we're saving Rod of the Hutt. That's like a mission of the week style episode for the show. The problem is that this is a movie. This is the first Star Wars movie in like 7 years, I think, since the rise of the Skywalker. And it's just bizarre that this is what you're coming back with. And I mean, if you kind of read into the reporting, especially if you read into what Tony Gilroy, the showrunner of Andor, has been talking about, it does seem to be the case. We'll see what they end up greenlighting after Ahsoka Season 2, but it does seem like Disney is just not interested in spending big money on Disney Plus shows anymore. Because if you hear Tony Gilroy talking about Andor, he's talking, he'll like explicitly say that Disney will never make a show like this ever again. That's like what he's claiming. So it makes sense, right? That Bob Iger is probably like, all right, we can give you like $150 million to make a Mandalorian and a Grogu movie. Shout out to the Weekly Planet. But like, we're not dumping $200 million into a season of a TV show. Like, we are simply not willing to put that expense towards streaming content that ultimately doesn't make us any money. Like, that's also what they did with Moana 2, right? Moana 2 feels like a weird Disney Plus special that is inconsequential. That's because it was. It was like the Moana 2 was supposed to be a Disney Plus TV show. Bob Iger said, no, just make it into a movie, and that's what they did. And that's what this feels like. Jon Favreau has said in interviews like, oh no, when they said that we were doing a movie, I then went and did everything as if it was a movie from scratch. And like, I'm sorry, John, but in no universe, in no galaxy, do I believe that like this is what you would come up with if you had the opportunity to make a Star Wars film. I just simply don't believe it that someone who's probably dreamed of making a Star Wars movie since they were a little kid, you have the opportunity to make a Star Wars film, and this is the story that you come up with. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I believe that they had, their scripting ready for The Mandalorian season 4, and Bob Iger was like, "Hey, you can take some of the episodes and turn it into a little movie." And he probably didn't have much creative freedom past that, and so he kind of just did this the best way that he could. That's the vibe that I get from it. Obviously, none of that has been explicitly reported, but can anybody really deny that that's what it feels like when we're watching this movie? I mean, it is conceptually and quite literally the same thing as that 2008 animated Clone Wars movie that I believe at the time was basically a pilot for the animated Clone Wars series. Like, they're literally saving Rhoda the Hutt again. Like, what are we doing? In order to jump back into some more positives, I definitely think this movie does a much better job of being standalone than some other recent Star Wars stuff. Like, it certainly feels like most of the stuff that comes out under Dave Filoni is so just like bogged down in lore, where it's like, if you try to watch Ahsoka, I feel like that show is basically indecipherable if you haven't seen Clone Wars or Rebels. Even as somebody that casually watched those shows but doesn't remember all of the lore super well, it's like watching that show is just kind of a slog for me. Even like Mandalorian season 3, like all the stuff with Mandalore and the Mandalorians and Bo-Katan and blah, 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 like, even for me, it was a lot of me trying to remember exactly what was going on. I have to imagine that if you're just somebody that watches the live action stuff, like recent Star Wars stuff is probably just total nonsense to you. You really don't need to know anything about Star Wars in order to understand this movie. It's very simple. It's just a father and a son. And yeah, you can totally just jump into it and understand. Now, does it have glup shitto moments? Like, yeah, Zeb from Star Wars Rebels is in it, and he's friends with the Mandalorian and Grogu. That's fun if you've seen Rebels. But if you've never seen Rebels, it's not just going to like stop for 5 seconds on Zeb's face because it's waiting for the audience to clap because they recognize the thing. It's not... Of all of the faults that this movie may not have, that is surprisingly not one of them. But getting back to my schizo theories that haven't been explicitly reported anywhere, it really does feel like there is a mandate from Disney that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau aren't allowed to do anything interesting with these characters. Like, don't get me wrong, I don't think that the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian are like amazing or anything, but I did grow attached to those characters. And they did successfully get to an emotional point where Mando gives up Grogu to creepy, de-aged Luke Skywalker that I do not like, and I hate that this is probably the future of these characters coming back in this franchise, but anyways, that's a conversation for another day. It was an emotional beat that was effective. It worked. It actually got me. Star Wars actually made me feel an emotion instead of apathy. But again, it feels like some Disney executive heard that they got separated and heard that The Mandalorian season 3 might not have Grogu in it, and they like called up Kathleen Kennedy and demanded that they immediately reunite them in whatever project is currently being filmed. And so you get maybe the most bizarre decision made in the Disney Star Wars area, where another character's show is interrupted in order to retcon one of their few genuine emotional payoffs to just reunite them in some other random ass show. So if you don't watch the Book of Boba Fett, but you're a fan of The Mandalorian, they're just back together in season 3 and you have no idea what happened. It is so asinine. And so that's why I can't even be all that upset with Jon Favreau, because he probably does not have the authority to do anything interesting with these characters. I would actually be curious to see what Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni that were working on seasons 1 and 2, I'd like to see what their Mandalorian and Grogu movie might look like. But I just don't think that they are allowed to exist. I think that they are only able to operate as corporate husks that were mandated to make a fun, safe movie for families and children. And that's what they delivered. And again, I don't hate it. Like, I hate it conceptually, but in the actual experience of me watching the film, I had a good enough time. But it could, like Star Wars could and should be way better than this movie. So yeah, if you have offspring, sure, take them to see this movie. I'm sure they will have a ton of fun with it. And if you are okay with watching some decent episodes of The Mandalorian on the big screen, to be fair, they don't look like TV episodes, but they're written like TV episodes. Then yeah, you'll have fun with this movie too. But if you're somebody that's looking for Star Wars to come back with like a truly great film, that's not what you're getting here. Okay, bye.